That question. How many of you have children? Wow. Okay, how many of your children spend several hours every day with media? Any kind. Raise your hands. TV, smartphones, computers, tablets. How many of you are concerned about what all those hours with media are doing to your kids? I know I am. Like so many of you who raised your hands, I'm a parent. And I also work in the media industry. So every day I have to reconcile those two things. Whoops, I want to go back one, sorry. Every day I have to reconcile those two things. Worrying about the media and being responsible for creating the media. So our kids are using a lot of media. According to Common Sense Media, children between the ages of 0 and 8 spend an average of almost 3 hours every day with some form of media. Over 8, it's more than 10. And for those children who are most at risk for failure at school, it's even more. Our children are the guinea pigs in the world's largest lab experiment, and we have no idea what the long-term consequences will be. No idea. This is really scary to me. So what should we do? Well, certainly we should limit the amount of time they're spending with media. But I'm curious, have any of you who raised your hands, have any of you tried this with your kids? I know I have. My 2 daughters are teenagers now, and when I take away their smartphones, they stop talking to me. It's the silent treatment at home. For younger children, it's the exact opposite. You take away their devices, and they throw a huge temper tantrum. But we can't let this behavior stop us from limiting the amount of time they spend with media, especially for those of you with children who are very young, because their brains are at the most critical developmental stage. So I still maintain that the answer is not as simple as just turning it off, although that's very important. And that's because the problem is deeper than just the amount of time they're spending with media. Instead, we need to focus on what they're doing with that media, and what is it doing to them and for them? Is it teaching them anything? You better believe it. All media teaches. It's a powerful force, and it influences us in positive ways and negative ways. And those of you with little kids know this better than anyone. You have seen your kids imitate word for word what a character on television says. You marvel when they use big words like abundant and predicament, and then you gasp when they smack their little brother and call him an idiot. Research shows that the violence on television and in video games is linked to more aggressive and violent behavior in children. And conversely, it shows positive effects on learning from media that's designed to teach. At PBS, we know this very well. We spend a lot of time trying to develop media that will have a positive influence on children. And we know that every character that we develop is going to become a role model, that children are going to soak up their behavior and their language like sponges. We also know that media that's intentionally designed to teach something, whether it's literacy or math, can have an amazing impact. And we've seen incredible results, sometimes even closing the achievement gap in some of the research that we've commissioned. But I think we should expect more from media, more than that. More than role modeling, more than teaching. I think we should expect media to light a spark for children, a thirst that empowers them to pursue an interest or a passion long after the screen is turned off. I think we should demand media that sparks children's curiosity and expands their possibilities. Because in the end, the content that we create should be far less interesting to them than the path of discovery that it sets them down. And getting them started down that path should really be our ultimate goal. There's a story I love from the early days of children's media. It's about Ursula Nordstrom, who was a legendary editor and publisher. She discovered Shel Silverstein, Maurice Sendak, among others. And she also came up with the I Can Read books. And these are books designed for little kids to be able to pick up and read all by themselves. And she was inspired to develop those books from a friend of hers who's a librarian at the Boston Public Library, who called her to tell her about something that happened one day that just took her breath away. And it was this little girl who came bursting through the library doors. And she said, "I can read, I can read. Where are the books for me?" And what I love about that story is that it captures so beautifully that sheer enthusiasm that all children feel when they learn something for the very first time. It's like they're standing at the edge of something really big, and it's so much bigger than whatever it was that got them there to begin with. Because this little girl could read, she could open the doors to the library, and she could open the doors to a world of possibilities beyond. And that's what I think media should do for all children. I think it should spark their curiosity and expand their possibilities. So it's really not about the books or about learning to read. It's about where reading can take you. And that's what I want to do today. I want to look beyond what most media for children does and talk about what it should do and what it could do. Here's our challenge. We need to rethink the way we look at children's media and ask ourselves, what are our kids taking away from those media experiences? Now, there's no argument that our children are spending too much time with media, but I don't think the answer is as simple as just turning it off or ignoring it. By demanding more from what our children take away from media, we can start to imagine a world where the positives start to outweigh the negatives. How? Well, let's begin with what pushed that little girl through the doors, the library doors in the first place, that sheer enthusiasm. Think about that feeling. It is in every child out there. I want everybody in the room to think about a child you know, someone between the ages of 2 and 8. And if you don't know anyone that young, think about yourself when you were that age. Now, maybe you had an interest. Maybe you were interested in soccer, or volcanoes, or whales. Well, suppose somebody told you that a blue whale was 3 times the size of your school bus. Would that seem like a dry fact to you? Or would that seem like the coolest thing ever? Like you had just discovered an entire world under the sea, completely changing your perspective. That's the pure, unhampered enthusiasm that I'm talking about. All kids are born with it. They're curious. They want to try everything. They're natural explorers. And oftentimes, an interest in one thing will lead to another, and another, and another. When my nephew Joseph was 3, he was fascinated by animals. He wanted to know everything about every animal. And what he liked most was putting animals in categories based on where they lived and what they ate. And one day, he was listening intently to me as I was ordering a salad at a restaurant, and he turned to me and he said, "Aunt Leslie, are you a herbivore?" Nobody had ever asked me that question. And then he proceeded to tell me about every herbivore he knew. Chinchillas, yak, zebras, all herbivores, FYI. So a year of that, and then he moved on to dinosaurs. Well, if you're into classification, dinosaurs are gold mine. Ask any 4-year-old. But when he exhausted that subject, he moved on to Pokemon, and then Star Wars. And every single investigation opened up a world of species that he could categorize and classify and explore. All kids do this. They make connections naturally from one thing to another thing. We know this, but sometimes we forget it, especially when we're designing something to teach children, like media. We start to look at our goals in a really narrow way. We want to teach kids something, and then we want to test them and make sure they learned it. And it's the exact same trap that our school systems keep falling into. This idea of teaching a cognitive skill that can be tested, too much cognitive, not enough sheer inspiration. Now, I'm not denigrating the idea that media should teach, and it should teach something that we can measure. It's just, I think it can do more than that. At PBS, we have seen studies from Sesame Street to Super Y of media delivering incredible educational outcomes and really moving the needle on skills. And oftentimes, the biggest gains happen for those kids who are most disadvantaged. And that's really important, especially when you consider the fact that 53% of 3- and 4-year-olds do not go to preschool in this country. Meanwhile, 98% of them have TVs in their homes. So you can imagine the incredible opportunity we as media providers have to be able to provide these children, to be able to reach them all and provide them with skills that can help them to succeed in school. So I think we should do that. I think that media should deliver cognitive skills and results that are measurable. But I also think it should aspire to even more. I think media should spark children's curiosity, and it should expand their possibilities, so that just like the girl who said, I can read, and just like my nephew Joseph with all his obsessions, it's not about where you start, it's about where you go. I think we should think about media as a launching pad for our young explorers. And we have a show that does a really good job of this. It's called Dinosaur Train, and I bet you can guess what it's about. It's about dinosaurs, yes, it's about trains, but it's also about species differentiation and teaching children to think like scientists. And what makes the show really special is it takes this natural interest that so many children have, but it gives them so much more. The guy who came up with the show, the creator, is Craig Bartlett, and he was inspired by his young son, who he saw taking his little toy dinosaurs and putting them on his little toy trains and inventing a whole world where they live together. So he created the show where the main character is Buddy, and he's a preschool-age T-Rex. He is adopted by Mr. and Mrs. Pteranodon, and every day they go on the dinosaur train, and they go back in time, and they go to the Jurassic period and the Triassic period, and they explore every dinosaur species imaginable. Every episode, Buddy says, I have a hypothesis, and then he searches for the answers to his questions. So the kids come for the dinosaurs, but they leave inspired to conduct their own investigations. And we know this really works because we hear from parents all the time who tell us about their children going out into the backyard and starting their own dinosaur digs, or going on nature hikes where they're keeping a close lookout for birds, which are distant relatives of dinosaurs, as you know. And on every episode, there is a paleontologist, a real-life paleontologist named Dr. Scott. Well, he gets a lot of fan mail, like this, which came from the mother of a 5-year-old. She said, thanks to you, I think he's more excited about meeting an actual paleontologist than he would be about meeting an actual dinosaur if I could make that happen. Dinosaur Train has made him more curious. Shouldn't all media do that for every child? Shouldn't the media that we create and that you choose, shouldn't it work harder to not just entertain, to not just teach something, but to spark something, something that can serve our children for the rest of their lives? Shouldn't the characters that we develop and the stories that we tell prepare children to confront the challenges and the questions and the problems that they are going to confront in the real world? Here's why I think this is important. There's a growing body of research that suggests that children need to deal with these kind of challenges at an early age. Some people call it developing grit, and they mean overcoming adversity, developing resilience, becoming independent. Harvard's Center on the Developing Child issued a report that says that the social emotional lessons that define grit are actually hardwired into the architecture of our brains as infants. And if we don't learn those key social emotional skills, skills like self-control and perseverance, which our volunteer earlier today really demonstrated, if we don't learn those at an early age, actual thinking can be impaired. And this is a big problem. It only gets worse as children get older. It leads to those skyrocketing rates of high school and college dropouts and so many other problems in our society. That's why I think media has a responsibility to empower children, to give them the courage to ask questions, to try things, to fail, and then to get up and try again. Now, to this point, I've been talking about TV, but you know what? All media can do this, especially if you think about all the games that kids play, whether they're on handheld devices or game consoles. You know children love playing games. That's why you can't get them to put down those shiny digital devices. But did you know that games are amazing at teaching resilience? If you think about it, in a game, In order to get to the next level, you have to try something. You often have to fail. That's how you learn. So games offer children a safe space where they're encouraged to take risks. We watch children learn from their mistakes all the time when we're testing PBS games, and we've come to see failure as this incredible teaching moment for kids. So you know when you're playing a game and you usually get an error message, and it's a voice that says something like, nope, try again. Well, if you change that, and if you give the children a hint, or if you point out why they got it wrong, they are more motivated to try again, and they develop a deeper understanding. So why can't we harness this potential? Instead of using it to encourage children to shoot more aliens or zombies or blow up more buildings, why don't media companies use the power of play to help children navigate the harder parts of learning? All media should spark children's curiosity, and it should expand their possibilities. And it should give them the confidence to keep trying and never give up. And if we could do that, then the content that we create can have an impact so much longer after they stop playing or watching. Because one day, children are going to turn us off. They outgrow all their favorite things, including their favorite characters and their favorite games, and every parent in this room knows that. You know that childhood is fleeting. It's a limited time proposition. As a mother, I think about this all the time. And my two daughters are great at reminding me. They love telling me that pretty soon, one day, they're going to be leaving home. They're going to be old enough to make it on their own. And as much as that terrifies me, I can only hope that the lessons and the values that my husband and I have tried to instill in them will carry them through to that day when they have to stand up on their own 2 feet. Because hasn't that been the goal all along? Isn't it about preparing them not for the life they're living, but for the life that awaits them? After all, it's not what you've learned, it's about where that takes you. So, like it or not, our children are spending more time with media than ever before. That's why I think we should demand media that sparks children's curiosity, that expands their possibility. Because, you know, it's what happens after they turn off the screen that really matters. For most children, the spark is already there. All we have to do is add fuel to that fire. Thank you.